Come join Melissa and her guests on the Chats from the Blog Cabin podcast. From North Carolina, this podcast will have you feeling like you've known these folks for years. Listen in as they chat about life, culture, current events, and more, all with a special Southern flair. Curl up with your favorite beverage and get ready to be entertained. Tune in now for a unique experience that's fun and insightful.
Hey, y'all, let me ask you a question. What happens when someone you love is struggling with substance abuse disorder? It can feel like the entire family is drowning. What if healing could happen together? Today, we're talking with Lisa again. She's back about parallel recovery and why families deserve healing too. So welcome to Chats from the Blog Cabin, the show where I invite people into the Blog Cabin to chat about life. And it's Women's History Month. Lisa is coming back on for Women's History Month because this is an issue that everybody faces. I think somebody somewhere down the line knows somebody that faces this issue. But I want to start off this episode with a quote by Nora Ephron. And it says, above all, be the heroine of your life, not the victims. And I felt like that really goes about what you do, Lisa. And let's reintroduce yourself for people who've not heard the previous episode.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And thanks for having me back again. Love that this is Women's History Month and love that quote as well. My name is Lisa Katona Smith. I am a family consultant and I support families who are impacted by substance use and or mental health disorders in their family to activate change in their family, even if their loved one is not quite ready to activate that change. And what I love about that quote and about the timing of this being Women's History Month is that it is so frequently the moms of the family who are the ones who step up and say, well, let's get the hard work going. And I want the message out there to be that as hard as this feels, it's like sticking your finger in an absolutely glass solid pond. The ripple is when one person in the system starts to change, the whole system is invited to change. And what a better time to invite women into that than Women's History Month.
For sure. And you're right. Most of the times it is the moms that have to start the little progress, and the ones that are going to doctor's appointments and the ones that are going here to there, clinical counseling appointments, all this. It's mostly the moms taking the kids everywhere because the dads are normally off working. That extra guilt onto the moms as well because they can't do what they want to do and they're pressure and they can bubble over, and that also can turn into a substance abuse disorder for the moms as well, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. So making sure that you're getting support for yourself and, kind of being in spaces where your story is safe and you can feel lifted up and supported.
Yeah, so let's talk about finding the spaces that are safe, because I know we talked about in the previous episode when you came on, is finding the safe space, because I think a lot of moms out there they're so fearful of judgment. They want everything to look like perfect from the outside, but the inside they're like crumbling.
Yeah. Well, I think starting with numbers is really important. 1 in 12 people in the US are impacted by substance use disorder. So every single family in some capacity is being impacted by this. So the first is understanding that even though you feel very alone in your journey, you are not alone. And maybe that gives you a little bit of permission to look for those spaces. I think, Melissa, the last time we talked, I talked about kind of putting people in buckets of safe, medium safe, and very safe. And, finding those very safe lanes and spaces is really important. And so there's a lot of opportunities out there for support groups that are full of people who are also living the story that you're living. And I have stepped into those support groups myself as a mother. I run one of those support groups as a facilitator. And I understand that going to 1 or 2 or 3 sometimes doesn't feel good. You don't feel good about it. You maybe hear some things or see some things that doesn't resonate with you. And I just encourage you to keep looking, reach out to other people and say, where do you go? What feels good to you? Where have you found support? I noticed this in this group that I went to. Do you have other ideas of places I can go? Ask your doctor, ask your therapist. There's even online forums that are really great and positive. There's also some very unhealthy ones. So if you happen to accidentally step into a bit of an unhealthy one or one that feels out of alignment with you and your value system, just politely see yourself out and try another one. I want to encourage you to try another one, because there's thousands and thousands of rooms out there that are looking to welcome you and that you will feel welcomed.
Yeah, and I think that's very important that you say that you feel welcome, because there's so many times when you already have this guilt on you about, oh my gosh, my child's going through this, my husband's going through this, or I'm actually going through this myself. And, I need support, but not feeling comfortable in the room. You're not going to be your authentic, true self if you're not comfortable sharing your feelings in that room.
Right. And ultimately you won't get supported, which is the goal.
So what should we look for in groups then?
I think really understanding yourself, and what you're hoping to gain from a group. Are you hoping to gain being an observer of other people's stories? This is a hard question for self, but sometimes we have to ask, are we just wanting to be a victim right now of our circumstances? Those tend to not be healthy spaces if they allow you to continue to be a victim. If you're honest with yourself about that, maybe doing a little bit of personal work before you enter some of those groups, so that when you do enter a group, you're looking for self-growth as opposed to remaining a victim of your circumstances. I think finding a balance of holding space for the hard circumstances that you are experiencing and encouraging personal growth is, for me, that's the sweet spot. I know that's how I facilitate my groups, it's a both and situation. It's not just support for your circumstances, but it's support for your own personal wellness, which, is sometimes makes your clothes feel a little tight, not literally, but figuratively, until you grow into that new skin. And so I think that's really important, finding places where the value system aligns with your value system. So if faith is a foundation of who you are, you might find a faith-based group. If spirituality as opposed to faith is a space that is more comfortable for you, making sure that you're maybe staying away from the specifically faith-based models, but integrating into ones that also expand bigger with spirituality. If that's not what you want, finding very kind of structured curricular ones, such as a craft group that's community reinforcement and family training. Those are not faith-based at all, and they tend to be very structured in communication dynamics. That might be the kind of group that you need. But, just really identifying, who do I want to be and how do I need support around that?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for most people when they go to a group, or they even thinking about going to a group, is the fear of, as soon as they go to the group, they have to talk immediately in the group. Where I know a lot of people are like, I'm not ready to share my experience yet. I'm here because I need support, but I'm just not ready to share the hard stuff yet to strangers that I don't even know. How can we get past that block?
I mean, just show up and be a witness, right? Observing is very important. I think that's what helps you identify if you're with the people that you need to be with. It also, watching other people navigate through the hard thing and watching their growth process or their processing process can be motivational for you, so that you can go, that was a really different perspective, and I'm going to try and adopt that perspective this week. There's a lot that you can gain without offering your own story. And then just being very cautious that when you do offer your own story, that you're not just presenting a problem, but you're also presenting an opportunity for a solution or for a process of growth. People who are looking for healthy spaces are not just looking for a place to complain about their situation. Mm-hmm. They're looking to watch others navigate and learn from them. And they're looking for a place for others to support them to navigate and be able to learn as well.
Yeah, and sometimes you can learn from someone else's experience and say, well, that worked for them, let me try it. And it may not work for you, but at least you've at least tried something else and something new and different, a different perspective that you wouldn't have thought about if you hadn't gone to these groups.
Yeah, for sure.
And so let's remind us again about your story, because I think it's important that we reiterate your story, because people are like, well, Lisa can talk about everything. She's never been in the trenches, but you have been in the trenches.
I have been in the trenches. Yeah. So, ultimately, I do what I do because I needed somebody like me when I was in the trenches. And my oldest son struggles with substance use and mental health disorders. And over the course of, kind of navigating that dynamic and learning how to be a family with this struggle, I had to put together a lot of different action steps for myself so that I could start to relate to my son differently and live my life in a more sustainable way. And, ultimately that led to a very different relationship with my son, which was way more impactful than what I was engaging in. And secondarily, it led to what I do today, which is supporting families in the process of becoming a part of the solution, as opposed to just being a victim or a part of the problem.
So you talked about you created some action steps for yourself.
Yeah.
Can you give us an idea of what some of the action steps were?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it started with personal identification of who was I showing up in this relationship, and was I proud of that person? And I wasn't proud of that person, so I self-identifying, who did I want to be and who was I? Who was I showing up as and who did I want to show up as? And then really putting things in place. Like, for example, I had a personal value of inclusivity, yet I was sort of showing up as very controlling, which does not really invite people into your space. I mean, actually kind of excludes people from your space. So, being able to identify my own patterns of dysregulation and disorder in the bigger scheme of this problem. And that's really hard because, a lot of families will say, well, this isn't my problem. Like, I don't have this problem. But you woke up in this problem. And whether you started this problem or you've got the action steps of continuing this problem, you're a part of the problem. So how can you become a part of the solution? Something has to change. And so again, going back to myself, for me, it started with how was I going to engage and connect with my son, one, and then separately, how could I sustainably live my life with the challenges that were occurring without it having to get better? Because mental health and substance use, brain disorders, are disorders that wane in and out of challenge. They don't necessarily have to go in and out of crisis, but they do continue to be challenging. They're reoccurring disorders. So how can I do this long term and continue to do my life in a way that is sustainable for me? So those were really the two action steps that I took, with a lot of details within those. But ultimately, those are the foundation of my process of parallel recovery: sustainability. How do you keep doing this? And connection to the person. How do you love somebody who's really hard to love right now?
So let's talk about sustainability first. How can you continue through this and still take care of yourself? So what did you do during this time to make sure that you were in the right space, so that you weren't, because I know a lot of moms out there that are listening are probably like, if their child's struggling with this, they're like, feel the guilt. They feel like they get depressed. They don't want to do this. They don't want to do that. So I can imagine there was some days where it was hard for you to get out of bed because you didn't know what you were going to be facing with your son. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I think some of it is just daily rituals and requiring accountability of self for those daily rituals, like a daily walk, making sure that, you put 3 healthy meals in your mouth, even if some of the other things weren't so healthy, that, you were at least fueling from the base level in a way that was, going to be sustainable. I recently had a topic with my support group called, lighthouse versus lifeboat, and making sure that we are keeping the light lit in the lighthouse, as opposed to getting in the lifeboat and paddling out into the ocean, and then 2 people are in the middle of the ocean not doing very well. If you're the lighthouse and you're maintaining the light and staying steady and consistent and predictable to your loved one, you're going to be better helpful to them when they're ready for that help. So using that as the motivation for making sure that you're caring for self, that you're engaging with your social activities. I look at the 8 dimensions of wellness, and every single one of those buckets is really important. If you're not being intellectually stimulated, you're depleted in one of your areas of wellness. So making sure that, if you engage in a book club, or if your intellectual stimulation is taking classes or going to a knitting store and learning about knitting, or whatever it is that your things are that might seem unimportant in the middle of what feels like crisis, those things are actually tremendously important to keep your light lit, so that when they look up from the middle of the ocean, you're there.
Yeah, I love that. Now let's talk about the relationship with the person that's struggling with the substance abuse disorder. How do you show up for them? Because I know a lot of parents are like, they tend to get angry and they let their anger out, and that's not very productive.
Yeah. So the two styles are either over functioning or under functioning as a parent, right? So you're either over involved and overdoing, managing, or you're done, sick of it, and you kind of create this break, right? And there's this middle ground, which is harder than both of those, or more difficult than both of those. But once you've got the system down, the other person gets used to it. It's way more, it's less peaks and valleys and way more just sort of small waves. So for example, it starts with understanding the boundaries that you need to set to create protection around yourself so that you can engage with this person. So for example, if you've got an adult child who is struggling with substance use, and having them come to your home is very dysregulating for you, for other people who live there. You can't get them out. They disrupt things, but you still want to connect with them, making sure that you're inviting them to meet you for lunch or for a walk outside of the home. So you're not removing connection. You're just changing the container of which connection can occur. It might not be in your home, but you can still connect outside of your home. And if you start creating these boundaries, then you can start opening up that connection opportunity. And they're going to learn, because they're going to want that connection. They're going to learn that it's not just getting what they want, it's actually getting the connection. That's what they want ultimately.
So you mentioned if it's an adult child, but what if it's a child that's living at home with you? Because then you can't put a container there and say, no, we'll go out for a walk, when you have to deal with them every day.
So that's tricky. If we're talking about an adolescent, that's a little bit of a different conversation. So we're going to assume that this person is not like a child, but they just might be living with you as an adult person, even a young adult, but legally you're not responsible for them. Even creating boundaries around conversations and if they become escalated. So for example, making clear statements back to, when we talked on Tuesday, things got really out of hand. I was unable to hear you. And frankly, I ended up yelling and screaming, and that's not how I want to show up in this relationship. It's important for me to hear what you have to say. I cannot hear it when I'm yelled at or when there's swearing involved. And so moving forward, if the conversations escalate, I'm going to remove myself from the conversations, and maybe we can reconnect another day. And when it happens, you have to follow through. So then the escalation occurs, you stop them and say, hey, look, I want to value what you have to say to me, because I think that there's something underneath the yelling that is important, but I can't hear you right now. Are you able to calm down, or should we reconvene after dinner or tomorrow? And then you follow through. You don't wait for them to do better. You follow through. So you're setting very clear parameters that this isn't going to work this way, and I want to connect with you.
So what happens if it's a spouse that is going through this? Because obviously there are spouses that have substance abuse disorders, and they're not wanting to listen to any of your boundaries that you set, and it's a different dynamic when it's a spouse.
So I'll go back to, it's not about them listening to your boundaries, it's about you enforcing them. So making sure that, first of all, they're enforceable. So for example, you can't do this in the house, or you have to leave. That's really hard to enforce. But if I come home and I notice that this has been happening, I'm going to go stay at my sister's for the night. And then you do it. And that feels a little bit like you're leaving your situation, but that's for your sanity, for your well-being. You're taking care of your personhood. You're not expecting somebody who's not well to take care of you. You're going ahead and implementing it. And if that continues to happen, you may need to, look at the situation a little bit stronger. Like, is this actually something that we can continue to be in together in the same household? And you need to maybe make some hard choices there, but it's not about them agreeing with your boundaries. It's about you stating boundaries that you can follow through on. And I would say 90% of the boundary issues are because of that, because we state boundaries that expect somebody else to do something different. And we aren't doing anything different. We're just making statements.
So what happens, okay, let's say, for instance, you said your older son had the substance abuse disorder. What kind of conversations do you as parents, even if it's a husband or or dad or mom having the same disorder, that you have as parents with your younger children to talk to them about what's going on and what we're going to do as a family about this? Because I'm sure that's a whole nother.
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing I say to people is stop talking about the actual behavior, and start talking about the impact or what you're noticing, how it's impacting them, how it's impacting you, how it's impacting the system, and get curious around whether or not they're noticing that too. So, for example, it's not, I'm tired of seeing you drinking all the time. Yesterday after the kids' soccer game, we became uncomfortable and we ended up going to the zoo without you because it was not fun to be around you. So is it because they had been drinking? Probably, but it was the impact of what it did to them and how it impacted the rest of the family. We were no longer comfortable hanging out with you. So we decided to go do something without you. And that was really sad that we had this experience that we couldn't invite you into. That's got to feel terrible to miss out on things like that. So you're identifying with them how it's impacting their life. Because right now that behavior is a solution to a problem and they don't have another solution. So if you can start addressing the impact on their life of their solution that they found, they're going to be more likely to go, yeah, I didn't like that, and engage in conversations about how to make changes.
And I love that because it takes the pressure off of them thinking that you're going after them because they're drinking or whatever they're doing. And instead you're like, this is how it's impacting us. And you're not making them like a guilt trip. Like, you need to stop doing this. You need to stop doing that. So you're not giving them rules and regulations.
Yeah.
You're just expressing your feeling.
Exactly. And observations, right? Like I'm not seeing you very happy. Right? It's talking about those base level needs as opposed to the behavior of concern.
Yeah. So what should parents look for if they suspect a child that has substance abuse disorder?
I mean, the obvious things, some of which are hard to suss out in adolescence because it sort of just happens, but isolation from family members, change of peer groups or removal of peer groups, not engaging in their normal activities, a change in appearance, noticing just their engagement in their life looking different or not as healthy as it had in the past, removing themselves from the things that they enjoyed doing before, lots of things, kind of the tried and true signs that something's going on.
Yeah, because I can imagine a lot of moms, like you said, they find out too late because they bury their heads in the sand almost like, oh, my child's perfect. They can't do this, even though there's been evidence upon evidence upon evidence that their child is doing something like that. But why do you think it is that most moms bury their heads in the sand and don't think that their child's involved with this?
Yeah, I think because just culturally, it's a shame-based problem. And we intellectually understand that it isn't a moral failing, but I think there's a part of us that still carry the narrative that I did something wrong or they're a bad person. And that doesn't feel good. And that's really hard to put aside, those inner dialogues, inner stories. There's a story came to my mind kind of along the lines of this, which is my youngest son is at a university that has a Facebook page that if you've got a child that has been in a college, I call it the crazy parent page of whatever university it is, because it's kind of actually funny to read some of the stuff in it. But there was a dialogue that was going on with a mother who was asking for substance use resources for her daughter, who had started discussing with them that she's noticing that her drinking looks different than her friends. And I think that was such a beautiful opportunity that family had the dialogue that they could discuss some of the challenging behaviors that are uncomfortable, right? Like we want to just say, just don't do that. You shouldn't party, but chances are they're going to party. So what do we do if that starts looking less healthy than what feels typical? And I thought it was such a lovely thing for that young woman to be able to say to her parents, you know, when I drink, I don't stop. And my friends drink, they do stop. And that doesn't feel right. And for her parents to be able to say, yeah, because that's not right. Like, this is a sign, early sign that this could become a bigger problem. Let's get some help around that. Those are the things, like when we put aside shame and we put aside right and wrong and those dichotomies, we leave room for this gray area of complexity. And that gray area of complexity is where most people exist. And when we can discuss hard things in that gray area, we can start catching problems earlier before they're bigger problems.
So you suggest starting to open the conversation with children as soon as they start talking, start having these, not the really in-depth conversations, but having conversations that they know that they can come to you with anything hard.
Yeah, I think as soon as they start having social interactions, and it doesn't have to be about substance use, but it can just be about, you know, noticing their interpersonal skills, or noticing their just stress tolerance, or noticing, you know, their ability to make friends or keep friends. I mean, some kids are hard to, they don't get along with other people as easily. And we know people like this. And, you know, that doesn't mean that they should be shamed. They just need to be taught. And then absolutely, as soon as children are starting to engage outside of the home socially, I mean, substance use is presented to them way sooner than we wish it was. And not having the conversation isn't doing them any favors. And the conversation, it's not the same as like what we had with our parents, which was, you know, don't do that. Like, that's not effective. It wasn't effective with us. It's not effective with them. They just sneak. But what can be effective is, you know, this is something that runs in our family. And this is something that I have been impacted by. This is something that, you know, we know this family and they are struggling tremendously. And we want to talk about the hard things because it's possible, maybe even likely, that those hard things will enter our family. So how do you notice? Nobody wants to become addicted to drugs or alcohol. Nobody like goes into experimentation with that goal. But how do you observe and make course corrections along the way when you start seeing your brain and body respond differently than other people that you see? Or you start noticing that it's becoming more important to you than it probably should be.
Yeah, that's true. And like you said, opening up the communication as soon as possible so that when you do have to have these hard conversations, that they know they can come to you. But I also want to say too that, you know, you can, as parents, we need to be upfront about our experiences as well, because most of the time you want our kid, you know, parents want their kids to think, oh, I never did this, I never did this, I never did this. And yet how many times have it come out later that, yes, the parent has smoked weed. Yes, a parent has done some drugs or something. That way they can share their experience and tell them it's not the greatest because this is what I've experienced.
Yeah. Yeah. And also being able to self-identify, what was I seeking when I did that? Was I seeking social acceptance? Was I seeking anxiety relief? Was I seeking fun? Was I seeking isolation? Like what was I seeking? Because again, those behaviors are solutions to an underlying need or problem. And when we think about that need or problem, we would never deny that person relief from that need or problem. But we're then shaming the person for the solution. So being able to self-identify that, you know, I went through a period of time where, you know, it was stressful at work and I came home, I'm just making up a story, but I came home from work every day and noticed myself, you know, by the end of the month that I was drinking several bottles of wine each week. And I really started to recognize that I was running away from a bigger problem that was harder for me to address. And when I ended up facing that problem, I realized that I didn't really need that solution so much. That was a really important lesson for me. So speaking beyond just the behavior.
And so let's talk about the peer pressure. How can we teach our kids not to bow down to peer pressure? Because it's so hard for kids even harder, I think, than when we were growing up because all the social media out there. And there's so much online bullying. So how can we help them navigate peer pressure so they don't fall into the trap of becoming addicted to a substance?
Yeah, I think again, it's curiosity around their skill set. So, have you ever had an experience where you felt uncomfortable or like you couldn't say no? And how did you handle that? And not giving them the solutions, but I think you'll be surprised at how many solutions they actually do have or skill sets that they do have. And then reinforcing that you've got a really strong head on your shoulders. And I'm glad that you have been able to trust yourself in those situations and validating them, kind of fueling that fire. Because ultimately, again, saying, those friends aren't really your friend, like they don't want to hear that. That doesn't feel right to them. They have their own internal dialogue, and reminding them that their dialogue is accurate and strong and correct is going to be super valuable.
Yeah, and I feel like too, I heard a lot of moms, and I did this when my girls were a little bit younger, is that they're ever in a situation where they felt uncomfortable, they could always blame me. Like my mom doesn't want me and put the guilt on me or put the blame on me so they can get out of the situation so they can still save face with their friends.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So what are some other tips that parents can use?
I mean, I think it's having open dialogue it's uncomfortable around the experiences that part of us don't want to hear. We don't want to hear that our kids are struggling with social problems or that the things that are talked about are scary. We're not prepared for that, but we need to prepare ourselves to be a space where they can come to us and talk about those things. Because if we aren't, they will find someone else, and that someone else might not be the best option.
So what can we do as parents about disciplining a child has like addiction or something like that when they're going through it and they're having struggles and you're trying to be there for them, but you also need to kind of lay down the law a little bit? Because I know in my mind, I'm thinking about one boy that went to school with my youngest daughter, and his parents just kind of just brushed stuff off and didn't do anything. And now I think he's in jail now. And he's only 23 years old. I mean, their life changes. So what can you as parents to make it instill that, yes, you're going to discipline them when they do something wrong, but not to the point that say it's not because of your disorder, it's because you did X, Y, and Z.
Well, I mean, that's complicated. It's hard to know what people are doing behind closed doors, but ultimately, I think it's a combination of addressing the underlying need or problem and providing opportunities for support around that problem and setting boundaries. And I'm going to change discipline or punishment to boundaries. Like, let's say, for example, use of a car, right? Ultimately, the solution might be the same, but framing it in a different way, not in a punishment way, but in a boundaried way is important. So for example, use of a car. If you know that you've got a teenager, young adult who's utilizing your vehicle that is regularly going out and partying and not making the best decisions, being able to say, you know what, look, we are here to help you find some solutions to what's going on. And that's a separate conversation. But ultimately, we are uncomfortable with the risk involved with utilization of the vehicle. And so moving forward, we are not going to say yes to any use of a vehicle until we understand that, some of these other things are being supported in a better way. So moving forward, using a car is just not going to work out. Now, what's hard about that is, as everyone knows, when their kids turn 16, you're like, you get a little bit of freedom because you're not driving here, there, and everywhere, right? But so, I mean, it creates more of a job for you. But I mean, truth is, the statement of this is a risk that I am unwilling to have is the message delivery system, as opposed to because this, now that. That's like punishment, and it doesn't work. It's not effective. What is effective is saying, yeah, so driving is a privilege, and it's a privilege that we have to say yes to because we've got the financial and emotional risk involved. And what we're seeing says this risk is just too risky for us right now. So unfortunately, for the time being, the car is off the table.
Love that, because it totally reframes. So they don't think you're disciplining them. They don't think, oh, mom, dad's mad at me. I did X, Y, Z. I never get any positive feedback from them or any positive reinforcement. All I get is negative, negative, negative. You're not really giving back negative. You're saying we care about you. We're seeing this. We don't feel comfortable.
Yeah. It's also building the case for higher level of care if needed, right? Like, so let's stay on the car topic. Let's say you decide, unfortunately, using the vehicle outside of anything besides school or work is not going to work out. And then they're using it for school or work. And yet you're still seeing you're seeing remnants of alcohol in the car, or you still are getting data collected that the vehicle is being used in unsafe ways. Then you can say, hey, look, so unfortunately, we were hoping that this was going to work out okay, but it's not. And clearly this is a bigger problem than we had thought. So let's have a conversation about some solutions that are higher levels of care, whether that means engaging in a drug treatment program or going away for a period of time, doing something locally for a period of time, engaging with a young adult or adolescent therapist that is substance use focused, like whatever that looks like, your next level of care. It's creating data for both you and them, as opposed to it just feeling to them like it's coming out of the blue.
Yeah. And I think that's important too, because a lot of kids say, well, I don't know why my parents were such a, this has happened all along. And now all of a sudden now they have a problem with it. And in fact, the parents always had a problem with it, but they just didn't voice their opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. And so stating those boundaries in little ways, right? Like just, last weekend when you had the car, what ended up happening was not acceptable. So from moving forward for the foreseeable future, weekend use of the car is not going to work. You can use it to go to school.
Oh, I love that. And they made him and ha, but staying firm in those boundaries, correct?
Yeah. Well, yeah, you've got to follow through. And that's what's difficult. I mean, they have more endurance than us. It's hard, which is why you need to keep your lighthouse lit.
So how did you get through it though?
I mean, support from other people, my own, again, like daily rituals, having a really strong relationship with my husband, and we're in alignment with, our process, and just learning how to be proud of myself in a relationship that was really challenging. It wasn't about getting rid of the challenge. It was about being able to create sustainability within that challenge. And there's, little daily things like not always talking about the problem, but connecting on things that are important to both people separate from the problem, making sure that I'm continuing to engage in my own well-being and doing the things that are important that keep me a whole person, and identifying that my entire identity was not in being a mom. I had a whole lot of me that wasn't a mom.
I so see that, because a lot of times moms are more focused on their kids, and that's what their whole identity is. And once the kids leave the house, you're like, what's up next to do?
Yeah.
But you brought up a very important thing in that whole, how you got through is your relationship with your spouse, with your husband. You said you had a very strong relationship. What happens when the spouses are on two different ends of the spectrum?
Yeah, it's very common, very, very common. I think what happens is you've got to really increase your spaces where you get support, because it may not be coming from that person, and then just become very identified with, this is how and why I am engaging this way in this relationship, being very intentional and modeling to your spouse, this is what I'm going to do. You get to decide how you're going to handle it. This is how I'm going to address it. But that is a very common thing. And there's a lot of times where moms are wanting to make some changes and dads are like, nope, black and white. And a lot of times dads soften once they see the mom kind of really being strong and resolved in the intentional change.
And so also too, how do you manage to navigate your marriage so that you're still together? Because I know there's a lot of people that if they have a child that's going through something, they ends up breaking the family apart.
Yeah. It
How
does.
do you navigate that?
Well, I think if you're navigating the breakup, just remembering that you both have a common goal, which is the wellness of parenting your child. And that needs to be bigger than any other disagreement. So there's that. In terms of not getting to that point, I mean, I would say that probably the relationship maybe was weak prior. And that sometimes that's the straw that breaks the camel's back. But again, I think if each individual is doing the work, doing their own work, which, can look a lot of different ways, but ultimately means that you're showing up intentionally. You're being responsive, not reactive, that the decisions that you're making, even though challenging and difficult, are thought through and very intentional for specific reasons. I think that your partner can value and appreciate that and can get on board with you. You can kind of tag team it a little bit. Like, I'm low. Can you take this on this time? Because I can't. Knowing that everybody's doing their own work so that they can step in when needed.
And I think that's important, like you said, because sometimes we get so drained, we feel like we have to do it all and be it all. And this is just an everyday life, and throw a substance abuse disorder, you can just go stir crazy. But if you have a partner that says, I can't deal with this right now, can you take it on? And they can say, sure. You're helping each other out. So you're protecting each other's peace.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So Lisa, our time is almost up. Is there one last little thing, you know how I do it, one last little thing that you want to reiterate, or something that we haven't talked about? The floor is yours.
I'll just go back to something we kind of did touch on, which is our discomfort with our children's experiences can't be the reason that we don't have the conversations. We've got to be the adult in the room and find ways to get okay with their hard experiences so that we can support them through them.
Yep, I totally agree. We have to, because they're not going to be willing to be open with anything in their life if they're not okay with them coming to you and saying, hey, Mom, don't judge me. Don't get angry. Just listen.
Yeah. And usually when that judgment and that anger comes out, it's because we don't know how to handle it. We don't know what to do with that experience, and it's really hard for us. So they need to understand that our well-being is separate from their doing okay, that they cannot do okay and we can still be okay. Like, they can't be responsible for our well-being.
Because if they start thinking that they're responsible for your well-being as well as the well-being of their siblings and their dad and their grandma and everybody else, then that's just going to weigh heavy on them. They might end up doing something that you're going to regret because they may unalive themselves.
Yeah, they're going to try and escape in some way from that pressure, for sure.
Yeah. Lisa, thank you so much for coming on and for sharing and for coming back in, because I think this is a topic that cannot be talked about enough. We need to have these conversations.
Thanks for having me.
And tell us where people can find you.
Sure. My website is lisakatonasmith.com. I have a book called Parallel Recovery. It's on Amazon. And I'm also have a TED Talk called The Power of Parallel Recovery.
Oh, I'm going to have to, where can they find the TED Talk at?
You can just Google it, Power of Parallel Recovery. It pops up. Also on Instagram, parallel_recovery.
There you go. So Lisa, thank you for coming on and for sharing your heart around this message. I think when people find out that you have actually dealt with this, and that's why you started doing this, because you couldn't find the resources out there, people are going to go, wow, that's a really strong woman. I want to commend you. And I also forgot to ask you in the last interview, how is your son doing now?
Thank you for asking. He's doing well. I mean, he has his moments of struggle, but overall, we've navigated the waters and are, in really good relationship with him and are there to support him when he's challenged.
And I love that. And you also said it also strengthened your relationship. Instead of pointing the finger, you're like, you made little boundaries so that he knew the boundaries. So I love that.
Thank you.
So thank you, Lisa, for coming on and for sharing your heart behind this and your story behind this as well.
You're welcome.
So guys, I will put in the show notes everywhere you can find Lisa, as well as some more information about her book. And until next time, guys, bye.